the expectation of what they should be based on what they think they...
Exactly.
You know,
what's the first thing that you say to yourself?
get a grip.
Things start going wrong, and it's very easy for it to just spiral.
Like you said earlier, if you're consistently clocking in at that low number, then you need to say, why am I consistently here? David, what was your takeaways from today?
My takeaways, I think, for me...
Oh my word, it has been a long time coming, but we are back in the men's room. And joining us for the conversation today, well, we got a very familiar face. Chucking it over to you, Maz. Maz, how are you today out of 10?
Travis, today I was a firm 5.5 out of 10. And I'll tell you why. I felt a bit offish today. Woke up, it was a bit rainy. I thought, do I really want to get up? Kids were mithering me. The dog needed feeding. The cat needed his pill. I was off work, but it didn't make any difference. No, but seriously, 5.5 out of 10 is probably not great. And it did improve during the day.
That's good.
I think now that I'm with you chaps this evening, a few hours later, it's a firm 7, which I think is quite respectable.
I think a 7 is a pretty firm score, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. David, what about you?
I think I've had a good, confident 6 out of 10 today. But I must say, when I left work at the end of the day today, and I stepped out that door and it was trucking it down with rain, and I'm in just a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, I could have been a good number 2 there.
a good number 2. Well,
No,
because a good number 2 does give a good summary of a shit mood, if you ask me.
Yeah, still
Incredible.
6 is not great, is it?
No,
I mean, should we be operating at an 8? I mean, that's kind of what our, if we're in a good space, should we be a 7 or an 8?
I think a 7 or an 8 is sort of respectful. I think for me it is a little bit ambitious. My sort of comfort zone is a 6. I tend to operate fairly comfortably at a 6 most days. And I guess it's a matter of perspective. It depends on what your comfort zone is and what your pain tolerance threshold is. If you spend a lot of your time as a 4, then a 6 is Wonderland. Do you know what I mean? So,
well, if I asked you every day and you were consistently a 3 or a 4, I'd be worried.
No, 100%. I mean, today, for argument's sake, I woke up this morning at around about a 4. I managed to rapidly within the sort of first hour or so of getting my shit together and going, I was able to elevate myself to a 7. And in the last hour and a half of technical tomfoolery, I managed to plummet myself to around about a 2. So I was.
We all went down.
I was swimming with
down to a 2, watching you set up this gear for an hour.
I was swimming with David in the bowl of life at a number 2, but now we're actually rocking and rolling. I'm flying high, about an 8.
Hey,
so,
great.
Yeah,
Great.
Pretty damn good.
I mean,
every day.
Right, well, talking about things that are interesting, guys, I suppose, it's been a while since we have done anything episodically. And today, I just wanted to start with a little bit of what's the linkage here? So if I said the following names to you of famous peoples, what links them together? Heath Ledger, Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington, Keith Flint, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Corey Haim. What is the commonality between all of those people?
Suicide, I suspect.
I made that connection. And for anyone that knows me.
Do you know another interesting connection between all of those guys? They were all of Generation X. So Generation X, the eldest person in Generation X right now was born in 1965, and that put them at around about 59 years old. And what we generally tend to see is between the sort of Generation X down to probably Zennial, Elder Millennial, Gen Y, they are the catchment area that we're talking about when we start discussing men's suicide. And statistics are showing that the highest rate of suicides within the UK were with men aged between the 50 to 54 bracket. So there's something going on in sort of Generation X which is really affecting a population. You know, men... The biggest killer of men under 50 in the UK is suicide. That's why we're having this conversation, and that's why we're talking about it.
Well, also going back to your first sort of comment about men of a certain generation susceptible to suicide, part of the investigation that we're doing as part of Men's Room is why? Why is there a certain subset of age-related suicides? And look as well, you know, we've just highlighted that those 5 or 6 people, those 5 or 6 men that you've mentioned, top of their game, highly respected, got the world at their feet, and still have so little self-esteem in the background and hidden. You know, how does that work?
But also, sort of frontman, sort of in important roles. You know, they're influential roles there, people that are known, and that must have been a huge pressure. So did that add to the mix and contribute to?
Yeah,
the expectation of what they should be, based on what they think they
exactly
should be in everyone's eyes.
Exactly,
and that pressure mounts up, and the persona that they've put out there in the public is not real.
Exactly that, and you know that beautifully leads into the conversation I want to have with you chaps today, and that is societal expectations and how perhaps language has shaped not only societal expectations but how we interact with ourselves in line with those things. So, you know, open question to both of you guys. If you are at work and you're struggling with something and you're really hitting a brick wall, what's the first thing that you say to yourself?
Get a grip.
Let's investigate that one. Get a grip. Where does that come from? Where does get a grip come from?
Again, it sort of is what other people expect of you. So you have to get a grip so that your persona doesn't slip.
Yes.
And your responsibilities, your perception of what your responsibilities are, don't slip.
So you have put that pressure on yourself, and you're turning around to yourself and saying that you're losing control of the situation. Do you perhaps feel that you're failing in some way, or that you can't do it? You're not going to be able to success. How about yourself, David?
Yeah, it's very easy to get yourself into a situation where you feel that you're letting yourself down. You're letting your team down. But I like the concept, and I use this a lot within work. I kind of take a step back, reassess, reevaluate, go back at it, and try it again. That kind of saying of if at first you don't succeed, easier said than done. In work, I find that easier to achieve. In life, not so easy to achieve. Life's a bit different to work, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of interesting. So you sort of take that logical modular approach when you're at work to a situation. So you're not at work in a sort of situation where you're bashing your head against a brick wall and convincing yourself that you're never actually going to achieve or succeed in that role. You're pushing on through until you found a solution to it. But in your personal life, you find it sort of difficult to do that.
Yeah, I think in work I've got a structure. There's a process in work, and so that gives me that structure and tells me, it's not working that way. Let's take a step back. We'll try this different approach. Life, we don't give ourselves that same structure.
No.
Life things start going wrong, and it's very easy for it to just spiral and end up in a car crash. Just I know in work I handle it better.
So that's like it's interesting. Like I'm very much the same. When I get frustrated or if I'm stuck, I am so hypercritical of myself. It's like, fuck's sake, Trav, you're never going to succeed. You're never going to be able to achieve this, and then my brain goes into the failure spiral. And then it's just like chucking all my toys out of the pram and I just walk away and I won't bother with it. And if we just sort of change the way that we phrased it. So, instead of saying, get a grip, turn around and say, well, hold on. Let me look at this from a different point of view. What am I struggling with here, and how can I succeed? If we fail at something, instead of turning around and saying, well, that's a failure, that's a terrible thing, we need to sort of realize within ourselves that a failure is just one step forwards on the road to success. Where we've got all of these like men specifically of a certain generation that have been raised in a certain way, that have been sort of having to sort of face up to the expectations of being strong, of success, of not failing, of not showing your emotions, of, the whole, sorry the cure, but boys don't cry sort of mentality. It's created a hesitancy for us to be able to be open. And the way that we engage with the language that we use to engage ourselves is very telling of that. I don't know if you've ever sort of really paid that much attention to the way that other people talk about themselves, especially, since doing what we've been doing. There must be certain tells or things that you can hear when other people are talking about the way that they interact with themselves. And, does that sort of resonate with you in any way? Do you sort of understand where I'm coming from there?
Yeah, I think definitely since we've been, kind of discussing this and quite openly, whether it's just us three sitting in a room or us with microphones in front of us trying to sort of make sense of it. But you are more aware because you're more accepting that you can think that way, that you're allowed to think that way. And as soon as that happens, you kind of open yourself up to a lot more avenues of how you can solve things. You're right, David, about the structure. I think the structure of work is something that kind of humanity relies upon because it is a baseline, and it means that you don't feel out of control because you have structure. As soon as structure goes away, your control and, your sort of control of everything kind of goes away. And again, life is not structured, but work tends to be. But now, a lot of youngsters, a lot of men don't have maybe opportunity for structure because they don't have, they're not disciplined enough to kind of segment their lives in a certain way that gives them confidence that they're doing things the right way. And look, if you've got a day where you know what your structure is going to be, you feel more confident about it because you're in control of it. But if your structure's not there, let's say you're unemployed or you can't, or you struggle with going to work, or you struggle with, kind of facing life, or even the responsibilities of having a family, etc. That structure is quite overwhelming. Because there's no structure there.
Exactly that.
Everything's random. Sorry, Dave.
Why can't we, in life, take the same approach that we were taking in a work scenario? We don't need to have that structure, but going back to the beginning of this, where Trav asked you about you're in that situation and everything's going wrong, and what is it you say to yourself? And you say, get a grip. But why can't you at that point say to yourself, why are we here? What's happening here? And kind of take that step back and kind of assess it.
Sometimes it's about the speed of what you need to do. If something is time critical, you push yourself into a space where you don't have the time to step back and reevaluate what it is and then sort of come back to the table. Again, in a lot of cases you should, and absolutely you do. I do. From a management point of view, you need to sort of look at it that you need to look at it from a helicopter view, a situation, because mostly it's other people trying to sort of, solve something, and you want to give them some guidance. So you do have to, step back, because that's your job, ultimately. Where actually sort of the age range that you were talking about actually does have the history of being able to have that structure, because that used to be our work environment. In the last 4 or 5 years, the work environment has become much more disparate and a lot more fragmented, and it's very distracting as well. And also, it could be quite demoralising if you are working on your own and your interaction is that sort of sporadic, and you tend to possibly hide as well. So you end up hiding from responsibility, and that makes you even more frustrated because you want to be involved. So you're sort of, and if you look at younger people trying to get into the work environment now, and that's their perception of what work should be, they're suddenly thrust into this remote or hybrid or even totally remote from day one work environment. That's what their perception is of work, and they don't find it very valuable, so they don't commit to it. We were talking a bit earlier about our companies, the companies we work for. You want to kind of give as much as you can, and they want to invest in you.
Yeah.
And they realise that you are, invested in the company, and they want to give you more to do because they realise that they're investing in you to move the company forward. And I don't think a lot of people now are invested in the company or invested in them because they don't perceive that there's a two-way street there. And I think that's becomes quite demoralising for a lot of people.
You touched on something that sort of really resonated with me there when you sort of started saying about the structure and the last 4 or 5 years. Because I mean, if we think about the major global event that happened around about 5 years ago that knocked everyone's work cycle on its arse, lockdown, everyone had to sort of find a different way to communicate, to engage with each other. We couldn't have the face-to-face conversations. Then when we could have the face-to-face conversations, we had masks on. Body language counts for pretty much 90%, I've just made up a statistic, sue me, of the conversation that we do on a daily basis. But everything, when we talk to each other, we can tell whether we're interested by the slight sort of lift of our eyebrow or the smile on our face, and the tone of our voice gives a lot as well. When you're communicating over email or via telephone or via voice note or sort of Zoom call, you're losing a lot of that interaction.
Yep.
And I think where we probably have seen such an increase and where this conversation has become more prevalent over the last sort of 4 or 5 years is probably because of that, because it has affected so many people in such a massive way.
And what extended that very same effect was isolation.
Yeah.
So a lot of people feel isolated even though they're surrounded by people all the time because their work environment is isolating. It's easy to hide, as I was saying before, from work if you're in a kind of remote or hybrid situation because no one's monitoring you.
Yeah.
And you either take advantage of that or it makes you sort of hide away from sometimes responsibility, because over the last, we're going back to not the 70s, 80s, 90s when I started work. That's how old I am. The fact is, there was no email. You were picking up the phone. People did only start at a certain time and end at a certain time. There was very little overlap into out of hours. And again, it goes back to when you're travelling. The thing is, if you're travelling for that hour and a half on the way in and on the way out, you might not be engaging with work. Whereas if you stay at home, you check in early, don't you?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about. So suddenly you extend your own day by default.
Yeah.
And so then you're in that rut where you go, well, here's the expectation. I'm starting at 8:30 now, or 8 o'clock, and I'm finishing at 6:30. What's that about? Why have I done that? And the trouble is, email and all of the communications, Slack, email, Teams, Zoom, all of the things that ultimately sort of connect you and are constant, have extended your day by default, and it is the expectation.
The more that we're sort of having this conversation, the more in my mind we're almost uncovering some answers as to why we're finding a larger rate of suicides amongst men. Think about what you've just said there. When you started working in the 90s, it was very much a 9 till 5. There was no 24/7 telecommunication or email.
Yeah.
You didn't have a mobile phone. You could actually switch off.
Yeah.
But now we are in a situation where people are feeling pressured into working just so that they're part of the team, part of the family. You're expected to answer your email on holiday or answer the work phone at 3 o'clock in the morning. You don't get a break from it. There is no switch off. There is no separation between work life and my life.
I think the switch off mode just doesn't exist anymore. I think you're always thinking about it because you're always online. You're extending your day by default anyway, and then that becomes a norm. It becomes accepted, and it actually, as you're saying, it becomes less of the norm for people to switch off at 6 o'clock. I do believe the 24/7 cycle, of communication is driving people nuts.
I think it's worth saying. I think I can appreciate what you're saying, and I know there probably is a high amount of workplaces that are as you're describing, but I think there is a shift also in the workplace and in society where I know I'm speaking personally, like where it's not like that. There is the employers are changing their attitudes. They're having to change, and everyone's having to change.
Yes,
Things have changed a lot, and employers are becoming self-aware and know that there's that behaviour and that attitude, and like, what we're going to do to fix this.
It comes down again to companies that aren't mature enough to support their staff, and also, ideally, you'd have turned around and recognised what you were going through, and then, created some tools to deal with it on your behalf. But a lot of companies, however small or big as well, and there are a lot of company cultures that literally, they don't really, everyone is a drone, and everyone's just a tool, everyone's a gun for hire, because they're run by, kind of banks that have invested in them and they want to see their return. So everyone's just a kind of conduit for that. A lot of people mistrust the business that they work for and don't have the empathy that we would want. You were discussing earlier, David, the future of you potentially in your company, and that the investment in time and you and how you could contribute to that, and that's been recognised. And I have that to a certain degree as well, and you suddenly that becomes a value, but a lot of people don't see it, and a lot of people don't trust the business that they're in because of all those things you just described, Travis.
Yeah.
That they people will allow that to happen. People will allow people to fall off a cliff. And let me tell you, if people are working remotely, you don't recognise it.
Yeah.
You don't see it happening.
100%. 100%.
It goes back to all of the guys that you quoted at the very beginning of this. You don't see it because they're hiding behind either a persona or something that's expected of them.
The first step in being able to recover from anything, whether it's addiction, whether it's a mental health problem or anything like that, is to accept and acknowledge that there is a problem. And I think that's something that, talking more globally, moving away from the focus on work or life or this or that, I think that is the number one problem that everyone is facing, is turning around and maybe not even acknowledging that they have a problem, but recognizing that they have a problem. That's where this, like, how are you feeling out of 10 is so important, because it really enables you to just check in with yourself. How am I feeling today out of 10? Right, okay, well, I woke up at a 4, but now I'm a 6. Right, tomorrow, how am I feeling? I'm a 4, but then I'm a 6. 4, but then I'm a 6. Like you said earlier, if you're consistently clocking in at that low number, then you need to say, why am I consistently here? What is the pattern? What is the correlation? And then you can really sort of drill it down, because it is, when you don't realise what's wrong, it's difficult to be able to open up, because we're all saying join the conversation, have a conversation, talk to us, talk to your friends. But if you can't put your finger on what the problem is, how can you tell someone what the problem is? Unless you really take the time to sort of get quite uncomfortable with yourself and be brutally honest with yourself, you might be missing some major sort of trigger points that are going to be tripping you up further down the line.
And as a guy, you don't want to admit to a lot of those things because they're the things that you are conditioned not to address.
That's right.
And so they just boil up. And like you were saying about your working, in a year of, the habits that you got into in that year, you weren't addressing anything.
Yeah. So, Maz, if you notice someone in your workplace, right? Let's keep to the workplace theme. Yeah, you're noticing someone in the workplace is being sort of super hard on themselves. They're sort of really bashing their head against a brick wall, and they're saying, "I'm such a failure. I can't do this." If you was to suggest to them different ways of engaging with themselves language-wise, what sort of things could you suggest?
Less self-depreciating.
Yes.
Commentary, less self-depreciating things that are, lowering their own self-esteem. And I think again we go back to it. You put into far too much. You put a lot of pressure on yourself if you think you're failing at work, and you might not be in other people's eyes, just in your own. But again, I think a lot of people don't reach out for that help because they're embarrassed to. They don't, and especially if you get a bit further up into responsibility, the last thing you want to do is show some sort of weakness or frailty in front of peers or in front of people that maybe report to you. So you need to, you kind of like become steeled, but a bit too steeled for your own good. There is no real answer, but it definitely has to be a sort of hybrid model, because getting people back into communicating with each other face to face is a necessity. And I think those skills are being lost for younger and older people, because they're just not, they're not being used.
Yeah.
It's like any muscle, you need to keep using it in order for it to be useful. And the trouble is, if you get lazy and you just sort of don't communicate with people on even a hello in the morning, or holding the door open for someone, or getting on the train and letting someone else, you're in that mode where it's all about you.
Yeah.
Because you're not used to socializing. You're not used to being, human.
Yeah.
Essentially with other people.
And David, on the subject of being kinder to each other and ourselves, what have we been practicing a lot lately? You've been dropping me some messages periodically. So, what is something, a very simple thing that people can do to give themselves an instantaneous lift and just shift the way they perceive life?
Might just be a simple gratitude.
Yes, indeedy.
So yes, this past week I have been boring you to tears, probably.
Not at all.
Times.
Not at all.
Telling you what I'm grateful for.
How has that helped you first?
It is. It's brilliant. It's a positive. And it ends your day on a positive. It makes me take a step back, evaluate my day, and think to myself, I did this, this, and this, and this. What was great about all of that? And summarising all the things that were great about all of that, and putting them down into words, and letting you know about that. For you reading that, I'm hoping that that's a positive for you.
100%.
For me, writing that, it's a positive for me.
100%. I will chomp on gratitudes all day long, mate. I love gratitudes. They are my favourite fast food because they just enrich my soul. I could have the worst possible day. I could be a 2 or a 3. And don't get me wrong, on the darkest of dark days, I find it impossible to even bother to think about doing a gratitude. I'm not saying that I'm the gratitude superhero, but when I'm able to, on my dark days, if I can just find one gratitude, I find it just lets a little bit of light through, and it just lifts my mood up a little bit.
That taking a moment to think through what's happened, whether it be good things and bad things or whatever, and evaluating across that whole board, what's good about all of that, and these are the good things, these are the positives. I'm gonna write them down.
Love it. Maz?
Yeah, I haven't got round to the writing down of gratitudes thing, and I think I end up being too distracted to appreciate things at the time and then bring them back. But I tend to go off on my own of an evening and a first thing in the morning with the dog and just walk around an empty field. And I found this field yesterday in the evening, all the flowers had closed up, and it was like it was green. And in the morning, all the flowers had opened, and it was pure blue.
I'll get a picture of that.
One of the most amazing things that no one else can see. And I turned around I looked at the dog and went, "Did you see that?" The dog's looking at me like, "What? What are you talking about?" And I'm thinking,
Biscuit.
that is amazing. Amazing nature's, it was fabulous.
Right.
And I couldn't share it with anyone. And this is the first time I've shared it. And I took a photo in the morning and I took a photo in the evening when I went for the same walk. And I showed it to the kids and they were like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, well, no one appreciates my gratitude of one to the other because they weren't there in the moment, ultimately.
Send that picture and we'll share it so that we can share that gratitude, because that's a beautiful gratitude, man.
I think nature has to be one of the top reasons to have a gratitude. The beauty of nature, getting out, taking yourself out into a situation like that, into a field, into the middle of nowhere. For whatever reason, whether you want to just stand there and scream, or whether you want to just take in that beauty and appreciate the surroundings around you. So, you can't beat that. It's one of life's medicines.
Oh, yes, I love that. Life's little medicine.
And that's why it's important. It's important when we were talking last night with the Band of Brothers guys.
Yes, yeah. Hey,
and they go out into this kind of nature kind of based weekend. But also they have an allotment. So they spend, young lads who haven't really got the privilege of having that outdoor experience are suddenly being given, this sort of nature-based kind of education at the end of the day. And they all come away from it, wanting more. They want to go back to the allotment. They want to kind of, and because they suddenly appreciate something they've never had before. And it is nature. It is pretty much they're growing stuff that then they eat 3 weeks later, because they have this sort of Monday night ritual where they'll grow stuff on the allotment and then they'll cook it, or it'll be part of their food appreciation on a Monday night when they meet as part of the Band of Brothers thing. And it's those sort of things that, again, as a society, we're losing. We're distracted away from those natural highs. Let's just say, they are the things that we should be, kind of taking more notice of.
It's all, and I think that is a key thing, and I think that's a nice kind of thing to sort of wrap up on, because we've been talking for a long time. Balance in everything is key. We live a very chaotic and unbalanced life, which leads us to be very detrimental and self-critical, which ultimately leads us down very dark paths, and they can be frightening and lonely.
We do need to kind of be more mindful of offering a toolkit to manage that balance.
Yeah.
And I think people lose perspective very, very quickly.
Agreed.
In today's society.
It's giving other people permission to sort of feel that way too, and to say, look, it's okay to be open, and I think that is a powerful potential resonation.
That all-important phrase, it's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely.
I think that's such a powerful sentence.
So, any final thoughts, guys?
What's our takeaways from this conversation?
Well, good question, guys. You tell me.
I quite like the idea of building this sort of toolkit to be able to help cope with the 21st century. And I think that's what the men's room, is kind of designed to do. And there are other, organisations out there trying to sort of build this, and they're coming from different angles. Some, like we mentioned, the Band of Brothers, they're coming from an angle of, youngsters not being able to sort of manage dealing with society, and older men not being able to deal with society. Young people who don't know how to deal with society because they're stuck to their phones and they're very distracted. They've got short attention spans. People in the workplace who don't feel enthused. All of these things are kind of the common denominator of we've got to sort of offer a toolkit to help, this new world that has been thrust upon us. We want to do that as part of this, kind of conversation that we're having. We want to kind of build this set of tools and a library of, kind of help. Ultimately, that when you're feeling in this space, you're feeling a 3 or a 4, You know, what can get you up to that 6, 7?
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
what do you do? I mean, the gratitudes thing is really fascinating.
It's powerful,
I
man.
thought,
It's so powerful.
I might call upon you to sort of teach me how to sort of build that end of day gratitude logging.
David, what was your takeaways from today?
My takeaways, I think, for me, that taking a step back that I was saying about earlier, that we have that ability to do that in work, and trying to find a way of taking that same sort of approach to life, and that taking a step back. The age-old saying, I remember my mum used to say it to me as a kid, kind of think before you speak.
Yes.
But the same sort of concepts of so it's happened, but let's now take that step back and think about it, and then try again.
Yep.
And make it work better the second time round.
Incroyable. I think my takeaway is gratitudes are amazing, and just be a bit kinder to yourselves. Be kinder to yourself. You know, think about the way that you interact with the world around you. Think about the way that you interact with yourself. You know, and then that is just going to be able to guide you to perhaps a better way of thinking and a better way of living. Because the more positive you can train yourself to be, the easier it's going to be to go down a positive track rather than a negative track. So, yeah. Right, so we'll end as we started, guys. Thank you all for joining us today in this conversation. It has been phenomenal. David, after this marathon of a meeting, how are you now feeling? How are you checking out today out of 10?
I'm going to give myself a comfortable 7.5.
7.5. 7.5 was what I was thinking as well. Absolutely.
I mean, you know, I'm gonna agree. I think 7.5, 7.5 across the board. It sounds right, feels right, and is right. Right, so this has been the men's room. Thanks for joining the conversation. Next time, guys, I think we need to just bash on a little bit about stigmas and some myths. Bring it back down to earth.
Sure.
Nice one. Well, that's ta-ta from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
And goodbye from them as well.
Bye for now.
We can't really do the hug because we'll just like wreck all of this equipment that we've got. So we'll do like a global hug like that. Laters.